Our presentation today is going to look at the impact of COVID on our crime lab, and I, am pretty sure that the impact is similar for most crime labs in the state, which I understand that's your focus is the justice system and the legal system here within Texas. And then we'll talk a little bit about just the court system generally down here, how it's been impacted. So to start off, I was going to give you a little background on HFSC because we're definitely a unique entity. Let me see if I can get it going. All right, perfect. So HFSC was created by the city of Houston, its mayor and city council, back in 2012. And I'll describe our structure a little bit more later, but the purpose that's included in all of those sort of founding documents is that we are here to aid and act on behalf of the city to accomplish a governmental purpose, which is operating an independent center to provide accurate and timely analysis of forensic evidence and related services. And so in all that we do, that's our primary focus. I'll describe to you a little bit more about how that works. Our mission, which is something that our leadership and our board developed, is very similar to the purpose, but a little more focused in that they wanted to make sure that this lab adhered to the highest standards of quality, objectivity, and ethics. And most of you probably aren't aware, but before HFSC was created, the Houston Police Department ran the crime lab. Like really most crime labs in the nation are tucked up under some form of law enforcement. And we had a really bad reputation. In fact, at the time I was prosecuting cases here in Harris County, and we were constantly getting notified of, hey, something happened with this process, something happened with this employee. And so you would find yourself going back and having to give notices on your cases or reopen old cases. It was just a mess. And so that's really the history that we were born out of. We have these following forensic disciplines, probably not beyond what you would normally think of a crime lab. We are different from, separate from, not the same as our medical examiner's office down here, which is called the Harris County Institute of Forensic Science. So confusing, I'm sure. But, our analysts here work in toxicology, firearms, controlled substances, digital forensics, and multimedia biology. We have a crime scene unit and then also latent prints. And so the crime scene unit is probably the one that you would not typically think of as being part of the crime lab, but it was just very important for us to have that function here, just to make sure that when scenes are being processed, at least the ones that we go out to, that the evidence coming into the door is of a high quality. And we believe that our trained staff here who focus on doing that every single day are better equipped to do it than, perhaps an arm of the police department. So that's been wonderful for us. A little more on our background and stats here. We process between 25,000 and 30,000 requests a year. That's only going up. Our full staff number is 200. We are lingering around 190 right now. 80,000 square feet here in a building that we just moved into last year. In fact, that was one of the first projects that I worked on, was the legal aspect of that, and working with the city attorney's office to get all of that through city council. We have 5 floors in this particular building, including the basement, which has a shooting range, And then we also have 2 other facilities. One is essentially a vehicle processing facility that's down the road. And then we have a house, not a nice house, but it's a house where we can do some outreach and other staging with our crime scene unit. As I stated before, we were started in 2012, so the legal paperwork, the ordinances and the resolutions and the bylaws, all of those things were being drafted and put together by the city in 2012. But it wasn't until 2014 where we officially took over operations, and that came in the form of an ILA, interlocal agreement. And so we have an interlocal agreement between HFSC and the city, which governs all of our interactions. We are a local government corporation that's actually created in the transportation code. It was initially used for, like what we have down here, Metro. So like your public transportation, those organizations that run operations, that's really what it was initially set up for. But the language in the statute is broad enough to include organizations like ours. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're governed by a 9-member board of directors. They meet monthly. We also have an ex officio on that board who is a city attorney appointed by the mayor. So non-voting, but they're present and definitely they speak up when needed. We have a corporate leadership structure. So as I mentioned earlier, bylaws, certificate of formation, you can find us on the Secretary of State's website. We have a president and CEO, a vice president and COO, a finance director who is technically the treasurer. And, so much of our structure does look and sound and feel like a corporation. And also the city approves a budget for us annually. So we get money once a year with the fiscal year, which is the calendar that the city is on. And we are designed to run out of money every year. So we don't have a rainy day fund or anything like that. Again, just a little bit of the organizational structure here. You'll see my role over to the side. When I do this presentation, normally I actually kind of move myself further down and then do a branch for every single department here, because that's really how it works. Any and all sections and departments that have a legal need, I am there working with them. Move along. So just a highlight of a few of the things that have been accomplished since we got started here. We developed an entire quality division, which is, I believe, 9 staff members at this point. Previously, when we were with the police department, there was only 1 person, and she had an assistant. We've incorporated Lean Six Sigma throughout our organization. So that means essentially it's a way for you to analyze organizations and do process improvements. And so rather than hiring a consultant to come in and like work on one thing, we have 3 individuals here who are black belts is what they call them. And any process, improvement issue challenge we have in any department, we send it off to them. They do projects periodically, just depending on how long they last. Sometimes they can last like 4 to 6 months, even longer than that, 6 months to a year. It really just depends. We're accredited in all of our disciplines. We're licensed. Now the Texas Forensic Science Commission requires licensure of analysts. And so we've completed that for everyone. We've reduced turnaround times, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And then we have incorporated blind quality control testing throughout 6 of our divisions, which is a national first. The only section that we haven't done that in is crime scene, for obvious reasons. Can't really create a fake crime scene to run through the system, but we do send, for instance, we make samples for DNA or samples for toxicology and send them through the system without the analyst being aware, just to see if they get the expected results. And then lastly, transparency is a cornerstone of everything we do. It's very, very important here. Our boss preaches it all day long. Our board preaches it all day long, and it's not always easy, but we are committed to doing it, and it is something that makes us very unique. In fact, if you visit our website after this, I mean, you can find out so many things. Our SOPs are online, quality incidents, turnaround, real life turnaround time data, all of our founding documents, all of our board meetings, literally anything you want is going to be on our website, except for case-specific information. So that was a long intro. So before I move on to the impact, does anybody have any questions about who we are, how we operate? Okay. Is everybody still there?
Yep, still here.
Okay, great. So now for what you actually came to hear about, the impact of COVID on our crime lab. And like I said, so much of this, I think, is not unique just to us here in Houston. I would venture to say that most crime labs are in the very same position. You know, we actually have a pretty decent group of attorneys who are working in crime labs across the country, and we, you know, keep in touch via email. And like I said, it doesn't matter what state you're in, we are all dealing with similar issues. Just for a little bit of perspective, I know that the COVID timeline for the entire country is similar, but I know how things happen here are probably different than the timeline up in Dallas. So for us, March 11th was when rodeo was canceled. And, you know, I don't know if y'all are from Houston or been down to Houston, but, you know, it's a huge deal, just like the fair that you all have up there. And that was canceled really because somebody who attended the barbecue tested positive. And that's when they realized, oh my goodness, having rodeo with all of these people every single day is a huge risk to the city. So it was canceled. The city and the county declared public health emergencies on March 12th. Our president declared a state of emergency here for us. That's something that is provided in the policies that we have to allow for us to send folks to different work sites, i.e. send you home to work. And then also the courts here did the same thing. They went into their emergency scheduling procedure, which typically for us has always been operated or implemented when there are hurricanes and floods. You know, that's the norm down here for us in Houston. And so they went to that schedule, which basically meant courts were pretty much shutting down except for jail cases, urgent bond matters, but significantly reduced dockets. On March 13th, we as an executive team went into daily meetings. I don't even know how long that lasted. It was such a fog, but literally every day, including weekends, in the beginning, we were meeting, talking about how to handle operations and adjusting to what local government officials were doing. On March 19th, the FFCRA was passed, and that was big for us because it, you know, addressed employment matters, specifically FMLA and sick leave that was guaranteed to certain employees. Well, as government, it applied to us. And so, you know, Congress passed that like within a matter of like 2 weeks might be the max. And so you had a massive bill on my desk for me to read through and interpret and try to advise our staff on with the implementation date of April 1st. So that was a really big impact on us, particularly on me, going through the law, trying to see what applied to us. And then we also had to come up with a separate policy to make sure that we were in compliance. And lastly, on March 24th is when we had our stay home, work safe order that was renewed a few times before the governor came in and issued his own order superseding what we were doing here. And in that local order, we were, pretty much immediately identified as essential workers. So it essentially meant that we continued down the path of, doing what we were doing to try to make sure that, we didn't contribute to the potential spread of the disease, but it also meant we weren't going to shut down. And so, most of our staff expected that, given the fact that we typically stay open when there's, a hurricane. But it became clear at that point that we were still going to have to figure out how to be operational despite what was happening with the orders. Any questions? No. Okay. All right. So the biggest impact on us obviously is going to be operations. And as I mentioned previously, we increased the frequency of our executive team meetings, which is key. We also went into a phase, and obviously we've kind of gone through different variations of COVID, but in the beginning, we were having daily daily executive team meetings and daily all staff updates. So first it started off as emails, and then it turned into our president here video recording a message to staff every single day. As things sort of, I don't want to say calm down because they have not calmed down, but as the hecticness of the situation calmed down, we reduced those executive meetings down to 3 times a week, 2 times a week, then 1. And then the same thing with the staff messages, we reduced them down, to 3 times a week, 1 time a week, and emailing in between as needed. We've staggered shift and alternating shifts. As you can imagine, each section is very different. The way firearms and talks are run is quite different from, crime scene or seized drugs. So we give a lot of discretion and power to our managers, and we have confidence in their abilities to figure out what's best for their section. And so each section, based on what the managers feel is appropriate and what feedback they're getting from their analysts, they have determined what kind of schedule works. The only thing that we've asked really is obviously to minimize contact, to minimize on-site activity. And what most of our folks have done is they've broken out into teams so that, heaven forbid, you have a positive or outbreak, you can isolate a team and not put the entire section down, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We already have a lot of records online, like I mentioned to you previously, but we did still have paper being used throughout the testing process, right? You are making bench notes, you're physically writing down, things throughout your process. So this particular situation has forced us to make that an even bigger priority to transition from paper to a paperless system, in as many sections as possible. We've essentially had no witness testimony, obviously, with the courts being shut down. And we definitely had to talk about budget implications. Like I said, when COVID hit, we were in the end phase of the budget cycle. Houston is unique. They decided to go fiscal year, whereas a lot of local governments are on the calendar year. And so the fiscal year we had to, we had already approved the budget and it was at City Council waiting for approval and final vote. And here comes COVID changing up our numbers. And so we had to just think about how this was going to impact our budget, knowing that we couldn't go back and submit any budget amendments to City Council. Questions? No. Okay. So one of the biggest areas of impact is turnaround times. It's like the only thing that people know about crime labs, right? All they know is like turnaround time matters. And so this graphic actually is from June 2019. So you can see here, we have it broken out on the left, the average turnaround time for each of our sections. And what's included in the turnaround time is backlogs, right? So if we're working on a backlog case from like 2 years ago for whatever reason, even if you literally just got it, just started working it today, it's gonna backtrack and add the total time based on, 2 years ago. But that's on the left, and then you can see the charts on the right there. You see our average turnaround time in days. June 2019, it was 63. And then the number of completed requests were 1,984. This chart is available on our website. It gets updated monthly. And all of these dashboards and graphics, we have a huge internal system of charts and diagrams that look just like this, that are real time, by each section, with all kind of detailed data that helps our analysts see, what's happening in the lab. So this is literally just one of, I'm not gonna say 100, but there are many that we use. So that was June of last year. June of this year. As you can see, in the turnaround time, we went up to 106 days. There are a lot of factors that go into that, but absolutely COVID was one of them. You look at the completed requests, 2,350. Unfortunately, crime overall is not going down for us. It's not impacting the number of requests. In fact, we are continuing to see a very large number of requests coming into the lab. So just by looking at the turnaround times, you can see how impactful it's been. I will say that the numbers you see are not solely attributed to COVID. So I'm going to talk about that in the next slide here, but this is kind of our bread and butter of understanding where we are. Anybody have any questions on this?
Akilah, can you break down what this means by the extended turnaround times for prosecutors, defense attorneys, and defendants a little bit? Can you speak about that?
Sure. So I'll kind of talk about the interplay later in the presentation, but
okay.
No, it's fine. But it's exactly what you would imagine. If our turnaround times are increasing, that means the case disposition time should also be increasing, because if you have something out at the lab that's relevant to your case, you're going to want to see it before you decide what to do. And most certainly your attorney is going to want to view it, because to do otherwise would be ineffective assistance of counsel, right? So the turnaround time increase has a real impact on cases. However, asterisk, comma, but, and, however, the courts here are basically at a standstill. If you're not gonna plea, if you are looking to dispute something in your case, to go to jury trial, heaven forbid, it's not happening. And so, it is bad for defendants and for victims and witnesses who have to deal with the system, because there's just this unending delay. But I will say, from our perspective, the turnaround times have not had the same impact that they would have had if the rest of the system was moving, right? So our increased turnaround times haven't really had an impact on the system because the system isn't moving. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward here. So delving into those numbers that we just talked about, and remember I said some of it's COVID related, some of it's not. Well, on the increased turnaround, in 2016, we had like, I can't even, like 1,000, 2,000 prints dropped on us by the police department. I don't know where they're found. I don't know. What I do know is they magically appeared on our desk. And so obviously we have to work them. And so remember when I talked about turnaround time before, even if you just got the case today, it's still going to backtrack to, you know, when it came in. And so that's really why you see that enormous backlog on latent prints. They're keeping up with what's coming in the door, but as they work on backlog older cases, it's going to increase that turnaround time. Also in latent prints, there was an impact that we didn't anticipate that has nothing to do with COVID, which is our crime scene unit. When we took it over, it's just steadily gotten better. And our CSIs are just really good at collecting evidence and prints. And so before, when it was coming from the police department, it could be a couple of prints, may or may not even be of good quality. You say you can't compare it and you move on, versus now our crime scene unit is collecting, you know, just so many prints off of a single case that are actually of good quality. So that means you are actually doing a full comparison. Toxicology, it's always been a struggle because DWI enforcement down here has just increased exponentially. And that's mean so many more requests and samples coming in to our staff. Just recently in this budget that was passed, we did get funding to add more analysts. We got in some new equipment. And so there's improvement there, but I mean, you're talking about basically doubling the number of requests in the last 5 years. And so even as our TOC staff is increasing efficiencies, it's still not going to make a big dent right now because of how many DWI cases and intox, you know, manslaughter and intox related cases we have. Also, that big increase that you saw in FBio, you add COVID to the mix when we already had delay because we were cross-training analysts so that every analyst could do all 3 phases. And so you would be able to interchange as needed. That is a very time-consuming process to cross-train. It means you pull people off of casework. And then we also have been bringing on probabilistic genotyping, which is a completely, like, another 2-hour talk if you want to have it. But the gist of it is that they are moving away from the old way of reporting out DNA results. And so it has been a very tedious process to train and sign off on all of our analysts in that area. And it is the wave of the future. Probabilistic genotyping will be how DNA is reported out across the nation. And so, you know, there is no option there. We must do it. So take those factors and combine it with COVID, and you can see why it's just been a struggle in FBio. I will say that actually last board meeting, so that would have been on the second Friday in July, we got approval to go ahead and enter into 2 contracts to outsource our sex assault kits to private labs. So that should help overall, presuming those labs don't get, shut down or slowed down by COVID themselves. There have been bright spots for us. We can focus on other areas. So for instance, when we were really sending folks home to work from home, obviously you can't take the lab with you. So that gave the opportunity for analysts to do more self-study, and we're really big here on, if they want to author, different scientific articles or write in journals, we really encourage that. So some people were able to do that. FBio really got into the CODIS entry, so over 500 CODIS profiles uploaded since March. Compare that against a little over 100 being entered in January and February. So that's been great. And then also FBio has had the opportunity to review more outsourced cases. So for instance, if we outsource a case to, a different lab, when it comes back, yes, the report is final, but we're not going to send it out or okay it until we do our own review. So they've been able to focus on that more. Any other questions on operations before I move into safety measures? Okay. We've done what probably every other business has done, every other governmental entity has done in regards to safety measures. CDC is our guide for everything. I've never been on the CDC website so much in my life. I will tell you that they are helpful, but they are also constantly changing. So it's been, I won't call it a nightmare, but it's been a challenge. Just after the 4th of July weekend, we began weekly on-site COVID testing. We contracted that out to a private lab. And so that's been amazing for our staff to have that resource, especially because of how long it's taking now to get test results back if you go, to a free clinic or all of these other different testing sites they have. We were able to get results we swabbed on Monday and we got test results back yesterday, Wednesday. Yeah. So that's been really good for our staff. Our board meetings are subject to the Open Meetings Act. So that's basically the laws and the rules that govern how like city council meets or your county commissioners meet. And so the governor temporarily suspended certain provisions of that, which allows our board to meet completely virtually. Whereas before you could only have like a certain number of board members who were not physically present. You had to at least have a quorum physically present. So that's a great safety measure for our board. I didn't really talk about it before, but our board by design and through our founding documents is very diverse as far as background. So right now our chair is a SANE nurse, a sexual assault examination nurse and professor. We've always had an individual who was wrongfully convicted and exonerated. So we have a lady right now from San Antonio who was wrongfully convicted and exonerated. She's on our board. We have a federal defense attorney, so no conflict there, but he is on staff. We have someone who did a lot of work in the Harris County Hospital District as a supervisor. We have the former mayor pro tem just joined. Actually, this was her first board meeting. So it's a very diverse group, but some of them are in the vulnerable population. So it's been great to not have that worry for them, to allow it to be done virtually. We use the Microsoft Teams platform all day and twice on Sunday. It is great, but it can be overwhelming because we have so many different channels on there. I'm a part of so many different teams. There are a lot of posts, and you can upload files, conduct all of your videos, chat, your video conference meetings. Obviously, we're not allowing folks to travel. We did not have a really big impact on PPE. We already order that normally when folks are going into the lab, when our crime scene folks are going out. So that was not a change for us, but some of the materials have gone up. And also we've had to do an analysis of supply chain risk and threats for just future planning. And then here, as I mentioned on the other slide, we provided over 500 masks to staff. Essentially, once everything got started, we knew that masks were going to be key. And, you know, we have a very talented group of people here. We do a lot of cool and different things here at HFSC. And so this was a suggestion out of people who like to sew. And so people volunteered to sew masks. And so each staff member has 2 if they wanted it. And then there was an option to get a 3rd. So I have 2 masks from here that were sewn by our staff as a work from home project. And then again, when I said that we've increased our use in the Microsoft Teams platform, if you look there, the chart starts in May of last year and it goes through April of this year. And you can see, I mean, it went from like, you know, not even probably 1,000, you know, on any one of those indicators, whereas now you look and see chat messages, 53,000. Channel messages, 4,000. Let's see, call participants, 449. Meeting participants, so that means, you know, actually like the video meeting, 623. I mean, it's just exploded, and it's been really great for us to be able to still navigate what we need to do without having any pressure to put people in the same rooms. And we've removed chairs and closed off conference rooms. And again, our priority is keeping the number of people here on site on any given day to the lowest number possible. In fact, for me as the executive team member, I'm here literally once a week, which is today. And that's just to, again, to have a presence and be here and see what's going on. But, you know, in theory, as the attorney, I could never come back to the office and be okay because everything is accessible, you know, just by a laptop. Any questions as I move towards the impact of COVID on our legal system here? Okay, no questions. All right. So the last piece of this here is just going to be sort of a broad discussion about the impact of COVID here in Harris County on our criminal justice system. I'm sure all of you all know this, but you know, here are sort of the main roles within the criminal justice system, and all of those descriptions there I pulled from some official either statute or document. So a lot of that is from the Code of Criminal Procedure. Some of it's from, you know, the lawyers' professional rules, and all the stuff regarding the law enforcement is pulled from actually the various law enforcement agencies down here, sort of what they say their mission is. So we are all separate, but very much interdependent, and we all have our separate roles. And so, you know, even though we might be aware of or care about what is happening to, you know, a different aspect of the system, the question is always, you know, is that specific issue within my purview? Is it within my mission? Is it within my work here at the lab? And if it's not, then, you know, you have to just sort of prioritize about, where is my lane in this, and what can I impact, and stay within there. So the next few slides, I'm gonna kind of tell our story through news articles, which our PR person would love because she does this all the time. So one of the very first things that happened down here was our judges, particularly our misdemeanor county judges, in conjunction with the county commissioners, were, they realized very quickly, hey, COVID is a risk to jail populations. Like, there's nothing about being in jail that is conducive to anything that you say needs to be done to stop the spread or slow the spread of COVID. And so they immediately tried to release as many inmates as possible on some sort of bond, PR bond, whatever, just to lower the numbers within the jail population. And as soon as we did that, the governor didn't like that. So he issued an order to say that we couldn't do it, and then they got into court. I will tell you, what has increased during COVID is a bunch of government suing government, because everybody is fighting over, whose jurisdiction, whose authority, who's in the best position to determine how to handle things. Obviously, local government, our preference is for us to do it because we know our people, we know our circumstances, we know what needs to happen here, versus at the state level, obviously the governor and his office wanting to have consistency across the state, but one size doesn't fit all, especially not in Texas. So that's the battle that we've been seeing. Thank goodness, knock on wood, we haven't had to be involved in any litigation like this. But that's kind of where we started. It was, oh my goodness, COVID is here. We got to get people out of jail because that's just a horrible health risk. The next thing we saw was, it might have been a couple of days, maybe a week, where crime was like, calming down, and then it wasn't. And so the police department, the one that we work with, particularly HPD, has indicated a huge increase in burglary of buildings, which makes a lot of sense, right? You have vacant buildings, you have people who are not, open all the time. So it's just an opportunity for some people to go and break into these businesses. So that's been going up. Also, murders, 50% increase during the pandemic. That was back in May. I want to say it may be up to 100% increase by now. It's been insane, the number of murders. And so that matters for us because on the burglary of a buildings, those are property crimes where you can collect fingerprints, maybe even DNA or digital images, like a surveillance. That's all coming to us to process. So we've seen no reprieve in the work coming our way. Also, the reason murders matter for us from an operational standpoint is our crime scene unit is not very big. It's a smaller unit, and we only respond to murders, officer-involved shootings, and then as needed, sometimes aggravated robberies or sex crimes. But our primary call out is a murder or an officer-involved shooting. So we've been swamped, and our crime scene folks are working, insane hours just to keep up. This was another story that came out. Basically, we had some positives within our one of our arms of our crime scene unit, and as you can imagine, that means quarantine, that means people out. And so this story ran because we were saying, hey, if this persists, we're not going to be able to make call outs to every murder, or every officer involved shooting. And that would be a big deal. And so, again, we're all interconnected. At this point, we've had the crime scene unit for what, we're at 6 years now. And so, I mean, can police officers, can homicide, you know, do some of the work? Yeah, they can do some of it, but by no means are they equipped anymore to do all of the sketching and the evidence collection and scene processing that we do for them now. So yeah, definitely a big issue. As you can imagine, one of the most obvious problems or issues is courts shut down. You know, we had dockets throughout, you know, as needed with jail cases, with urgent matters, but on the whole, just going to court and having things worked out, having daily dockets of, you know, 50, 60 people, that just was done with. And jury trials were suspended. So since, you know, late March, there's not been one jury trial. So you can just imagine the backlog. It's troublesome. And what you may or may not realize about Houston is, you know, Hurricane Harvey was, you know, what, like 3 years ago now, maybe 4. We had not come out of that in the criminal justice system. The criminal justice building here just became functional, fully functional, like 2 days ago. I mean, I'm exaggerating, it was maybe like 3 weeks ago, but we hadn't even recovered from Harvey. Our jury center is done. We had a brand new jury center. It's never been reopened. We had to go back to the old one because it was damaged from Harvey. So we already had a lot of backlog and delay within the court system. And to add COVID onto that, it's been a lot. And you can see here, the chart at the bottom there, you can see the numbers back in 2018 and 2019. So for instance, the chart on the left is actually misdemeanor courts. It doesn't say that clearly. It says Harris County criminal courts. That means misdemeanor courts. So they're carrying an average docket of 2,500 cases, and we have a total of 38,749 cases. If you look at the chart at the bottom, it shows the trend from starting in June of 2018. If you look at June of 2018, you see there were a total of like 22,000 cases. And now it's all the way up to 38.7. And I know that it's gotten worse since this was done last month. On the right-hand side where it says Harris County District Courts, that means our felony courts, 41,275 cases. If you do the comparison, back in June of 2018, it was like 25,000. And we're at 41,000. That means each judge is carrying a docket of almost 2,000 cases. And that's not a one jury trial available to anybody since March. So we are in dire straits for sure. What you will also see on this chart is the chart on the left from misdemeanor court. Notice how low that red bar is across courts. The red bar is for jail cases. So even though they had to fight with the governor, we've been doing a lot of bail reform here, and you'll see that you know, the number of jail cases is very small compared to the overall caseload. But when you hop over to felony, first of all, because bail reform didn't really hit the felony side, but then also it's felonies, right? So you have murders, you have sexual assaults, you have child sexual assaults, you have ag robs. So, you know, making bond is going to be harder. And you see, like, just look at how many thousands of people are in jail, not from convictions, but waiting on disposition of their case. And then the last and kind of most recent article here is, so the Supreme Court has issued executive orders or emergency orders. I think they're on like number 18 now, basically saying, limit in-person docket, no jury trials, unless the administrative judges come up with a way to handle like just the most urgent jury trials. And so we just started July 6th, jury service started back in NRG, so like our football stadium annex, if you will. And the first test run of it is reselecting or selecting the new grand jury. So not even like a jury trial, just like grand jury is the test case to see, can we pick a jury in a spread out place? And then from there, like, who knows how that's gonna actually work in a courtroom. So I see that we're at almost at 1 here. And I didn't know on timing, Kenishra, if you wanted to just go on to questions, or I have like 1 more slide, I think.
You have until 1:15, so you can do your one. You have
okay.
Your slide.
Okay. So 2 more content slides, actually. Okay, so that's sort of the story in news articles about the overall domino effect or ripple effect here in Harris County. Going back to those different roles that I talked to you about in the beginning, just in a very broad sense, here are some of the other ways that other aspects of the system have been impacted. Prosecutors are all working remotely. Ironically, we ended up in the same building as them. They needed a temporary place. We needed a permanent place. They've been here since Harvey. I don't know if they're gonna stay, but ironically, we're in the same building as them now on different kind of wings, and they're all remote and they're appearing virtually in court as needed. And as a former prosecutor, like I can tell you, it has to be super frustrating for victims and witnesses. I've tried old cases and it sucks. I've tried 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old murder cases, and it's just like people are tired. They moved on in life. They don't want to be bothered with it. Their memories get hazy. Heaven forbid you're a victim. Like, oh my goodness, to wait so long for a disposition or justice is difficult. So they're managing a whole different set of issues. The defense side, obviously, everything is delayed. If your client doesn't want to plead, they're not guilty, or the state's not making you a reasonable offer, then your client's just in limbo indefinitely. Like, I honestly cannot imagine as a defense attorney saying, I have no idea when you will get a jury trial. It might be 2022. It might be the end of 2021. That's a whole different level of pressure and, just impact that, again, I can't even imagine. And then also, waiving a jury trial or allowing somebody to testify remotely, that's a whole host of legal issues, constitutional legal issues that, I don't think an attorney in good conscience is going to recommend that, especially if the only reason you're doing it is because of COVID. But for COVID, you would want a jury. Well, then you can't advise your client to do that. And if you do, it's just going to come back on appeal. We've talked about all the stuff here at our lab. I will say that we are asking attorneys in the courts to consider allowing us to testify remotely, to provide certificates of analysis or chain of custody affidavits. Those are all legally permissible under the Code of Criminal Procedure, Article 38. And I can tell you that everybody is like, thank you for that information, but we're not waiving the right to the right to confront witnesses. We're not waiving it. So there are actually ways that we could do some of this stuff remotely or virtually, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I'm not holding my breath on that. talked a little bit about the courts, but again, there's been an effort to lower bonds, so at least get people out of jail while they're awaiting disposition. Obviously, if it's safe for the community and for the individual. They actually just got back up to a full schedule. For a while. It was like Monday through Thursday. The courthouse was open, but even then it was staggered dockets. They are pretty much back into the full swing as far as scheduling, but most appearances are waived for bond defendants. And even still, the dockets are just like way, way lower. And then, like I said, based on the Supreme Court's order, jury trials are suspended, but the administrative judges can come up with a plan if they want to have like a limited number of trials. So we really just started that phase of like, how can we figure out some kind of way to do some jury trial on some cases. I think the first one that was explicitly permitted was, we have a lot of explosions down here apparently, but we had a big explosion a couple of years ago, and so that has like explicitly been given the green light to try to get a jury for that case. And then law enforcement, again, they've seen increase in certain crimes, but then their COVID positive numbers and quarantine numbers are off the charts as well, and so they're having to manage all kinds of issues with personnel and actually being able to respond still to, crimes as they occur. So impact is widespread, a domino effect, a ripple effect. We're just also interconnected, that we're dealing with some of the same impacts of COVID, but we all have a very different role. And so each of us is just trying to manage the general COVID pandemic, but then also the specific challenges it brings to our responsibilities in each of our professions. So yeah, any questions from anybody? Comments, confusion, outrage?
Okay, I don't see anyone who's unmuted, so I'll ask the penultimate slide, the slide right before your last one. You mentioned that you guys have offered to do remote testimony, and you've received pushback that they're not willing to give up confronting witnesses. What would providing the remote testimony have allowed you guys to do?
So providing remote testimony is merely us putting out a solution as they are working to bring trials back up. I don't know that we've gotten one request, maybe two for certificates of analysis for some kind of hearing. But we haven't been asked to testify or bring in information for any hearings. So this is just a proactive solution that we put out to the courts as they start thinking about commencing jury trials. So, what good does it do to have one witness who doesn't have to come in, or a couple of witnesses who don't have to come in person? Maybe it's not a huge impact, but it's a huge impact for us not to have our staff, going in person somewhere and potentially exposing themselves. So yeah, that's forward looking.
So I've seen some discussion about the NRG grand jury process, or I've seen more than discussion. I've actually seen a couple of practice sessions of attorneys attempting to do veneer or voir dire in NRG, and the common refrain is you can't see people. It's picking a jury or dealing with a jury or dealing with a defendant for all parties requires you to see faces. So there's not only the issue of most people will be masked up, but also the space in the NRG space is so huge that you can't actually see, even if there weren't masks, you can't see people's faces. And it's difficult to hear people's voices. As a former prosecutor can you tell us what you think, or can you explain to students why it's important? Well, what you would think if you had to pick a jury, or thinking about jury service in such a big space, and the difficulties of doing that with, you know, half of a face covered, or why they ought to think about the implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's huge. So much of jury selection is reading the people in the room, you know, make a note, you know, panelist number 50 is rolling his eyes, or, you know, every time the prosecutor says something, you know, they're sighing. All of those nonverbal cues are really important to jury selection, because sometimes you may not really get to talk much with the entire panel, especially in a felony trial. So it is definitely a huge challenge. And I, you know, in part, I'm glad I don't have to figure this out, because it's very complicated. I think if you were to do jury selection in a space that big, I think you would want to do it by having people social distance rather than mask, even though I know masks are super important. But I think you would probably prefer to have them spread out, and have the attorneys have on the mask, so that the attorney could actually see facial expressions, demeanors, etc. You're right, if they have on masks and you're asking questions and trying to hear and then trying to see, you know, the nonverbal cues that go along with somebody's verbal comments, that would be really difficult. And I don't think that'd be good for either side, because the defense and the prosecutors are gaining information from that process to determine, okay, who's going to give me a fair shot, who's going to give my client a fair shot.
So you guys are independent now of the police, of Houston PD, but you work in the same building as the district attorneys or the prosecutors. Mm-hmm. And one of the common refrains throughout this entire process of the criminal legal process and the changes is that a lot of defense attorneys more than feel slighted, because they haven't been being consulted with policy changes, and they haven't been being consulted about the impact of COVID on their clients. Can defense attorneys independently ask you guys to provide them with information about their client's case or things like that? Can you outside of prosecutors providing that information and discovery?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked very hard to reestablish the relationships and reset them from what they were before. We make it very clear to our staff and to our stakeholders, you know, yes, we are working with or on behalf of the police department, but once the evidence comes here, the science is what it is, and we're going to, you know, treat it the same no matter what. We've built up a lot of barriers to reduce sort of case information coming directly to analysts, so that they don't, you know, have bias knowingly or unknowingly about, you know, that particular piece of evidence and its role in the case they're working. And I would say we have a really good relationship with the defense bar here, because, like you said, if they have a question, they want to talk about their case, they want to talk about what we've done, they want to do trial prep, we're all here for it. And when I talk about us communicating with our stakeholders, we consider the defense bar to be a stakeholder as well. So if we send out a communication about something we're doing, then the defense bar is going to get it, so are the prosecutors. We have quarterly meetings as a leadership team. We have a quarterly meeting with the DA office leadership. We have a quarterly meeting with the public defender's office leadership. We have a quarterly meeting with the police department leadership. So, you know, we just really try to push that home. The science is the science, and that's what we're here for. And if the defense bar wants to talk to us or get it, they can have it. And if the prosecutors want to get it, they can have it. It's all the same to us.
Since we don't know how long any of this is going to last. What do you think that like your office needs to make this like a sustainable effort from you all, and kind of like in conjunction with all the other stakeholders that you guys have?
Yeah, good question. You know, for us, again, being very focused on like our role in the system, honestly, so long as the court system is slowed down, then we can maintain our, you know, operations here. If we're allowed to continue staggering and doing, you know, different shifts and basically, you know, kind of managing that aspect of it, understanding that there will be increased turnaround times for some. I don't know if you notice on there, but like firearms and seized drugs, that stuff is out of here in a week or less. Is no big deal. They've been able to manage just fine. But for our other sections, if we can continue on this kind of shift work, which is best for us to make sure that we're limiting the potential spread of the outbreak, so long as the court system is stalled out, we're okay, which is sad to say, but it's true. I think in the back of our minds, we know whenever things get back to normal, that could be a year from now or whatever, it's going to be very rough around here because our analysts are going to be getting subpoenaed to court all day and twice on Sunday, and it's going to put a huge strain and stress on our folks to testify frequently about older cases while trying to stay in the lab and do the work that's coming in the door.
So I'm gonna go a little personal here. On the personal side, it's kind of like what we do when you want to focus on what you can do professionally or what your job requires you to do so that you can get through the day. But you're also, on the other hand, on a personal side, weighing the unfairness of other stakeholders in the system, not just the attorneys, but of course victims, defendants, and families that are impacted. So for those on the who may not be going, who may go into criminal law, who may not, what do you think are next steps, or how do you think that we contribute as people who have the legal knowledge of what's happening or the collateral consequences? How do you think we contribute to helping alleviate some of the other distressing parts of the system as we move forward in the next few years?
You know, honestly, I think it just needs to be all hands on deck. Like, we're going to have to be strategic and intentional about how we move from, you know, where we are today to a place of quote unquote normalcy. And to be quite frank, when it was normal, it wasn't great either, right? Like, it was crazy backlog and it took a long time to get to trial then too. But I mean, I think that's really the place where we can assist, is as many thoughtful minds and folks there are who can come up with solutions to how we work through these backlogs. I mean, that's going to be huge. So for instance, here in Harris County, we have like 2 project courts to where they're visiting judges and all they do is try cases. So trial courts can send up like whatever. You know, moving forward, that might have to increase. You know, we might have to have, you know, even more visiting judges whose sole responsibility and role is to try cases, because, you know, there's no way that a normal court is going to be able to manage getting through this backlog of trial cases on their own. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that. I would say just educate yourself, get informed about wherever you are, learn about the system. We need to communicate with the public about delays and changes, et cetera, particularly witnesses and victims, so that, you know, it's gonna suck that there's gonna be a delay, but at least if you're telling folks up front and you're being honest about it, at least they have some sort of expectation that they can manage in their mind rather than the uncertainty of never, right? So, you know, I think those are just a few things, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
If I can say one more thing, something you can personally do is respond. If you get a jury summons, please go. Tell your friends, tell your loved ones. Please tell them to go, because as we pick up with these jury trials, that means we're going to be calling them more often. And if we don't have enough people to get a panel, then it's just going to delay the system even more. So at a personal, you know, real life level, respond to your jury summons.
Thank you all for joining us